It's January the 14th today, and we are joined in Václav Havel Library by Jewher Ilham and Mr. Enver John, both connected to a renowned academician, writer, intellectual, and professor of economy, Mr. Ilham Tohti, who is being a political prisoner in China for his work, for his nationality, and for the message of hope, understanding, and cooperation he was trying to spread. I would like to ask both of you to say something about your father, Jewher, and about the person you have in the title of your initiative, Mr. Ilham Tohti. Why his work is so important, and what were the reasons that led to his imprisonment?
My father was an honest man. Whenever he has an opinion, he has to voice it. I believe that's one of the reasons why he got himself into trouble. Since the 90s, he was constantly publishing articles, gathering students and colleagues to talk about the situation of the Uyghur people, the history of the Uyghur region, and the political context. And he was targeted by the Chinese police since before I was even born. He was threatened dozens of times, but he continued. He never backed off. In 2006, he created a website called Uyghurbiz.com, where he intended to provide a platform where people can freely exchange their ideas to reveal the truth of the Uyghur daily lives, and to really help the Chinese people understand who Uyghurs are, because the Chinese people don't have access to know who Uyghurs really are. The Chinese news are not portraying the Uyghurs ever in positive manners. Uyghur people have, for decades, Uyghur people have been portrayed as backwards, uneducated, pickpockets, who are ungrateful for all the wonderful benefits and incentives that the Chinese government provided. And my father wanted to provide a platform to really give Uyghur people voices and help provide a platform where Han Chinese and the Uyghurs can peacefully to have a dialogue and exchange ideas, so we learned how to coexist together peacefully.
I would like to begin with express the gratitude of the Uyghur people to the Czech nation for awarding Václav Havel Human Rights Prize to Ilham Tohti. And I thank you for organizing Václav Havel Library, the 10th anniversary, commemorating the 10th anniversary of his imprisonment. As I said before, I left my country 63 years ago. Personally, I don't know Ilham Tohti, and I have never met him. But for me, as someone who have been living for 50 years in Europe and doing advocacy work for the Uyghur cause for at least 3 decades, he was very important, courageous, brave man who came at a very crucial time of history to inform the world about a problem which the world didn't know. The problem was the human rights of Uyghur people, the rights which actually was written down in the Chinese constitution but never implemented. He, as a scholar, as an intellectual, introduced the problem both to Chinese world and free democracies in the world, that there is a problem in China which is a problem of rights, a legal problem. So he was very important, and China at that time, instead of using his realistic proposals, put him in jail and wanted to silence him. And for me, he was very important, should not be forgotten. He should be promoted around the world, and his ideas should be known, and efforts should be made to free him. And this was the inspiration which told me to create a movement to defend him.
Thank you. Professor Tohti was imprisoned for life for separatism, despite the fact that for his whole life he was promoting understanding and peaceful dialogue. I would like you to explain us what happened, why this happened, and also to speak about how Uyghurs live in the Uyghur region of China. What are all the crimes that are happening to them, that are conducted and directed by Chinese Communist Party, crimes that many countries in the world call a genocide?
My father was a scholar, and in order to conduct his research and really understand how his people in his homeland they're really living, what kind of conditions they're living, he traveled villages to village, cities to cities, counties to counties to conduct interviews and research, to really closely monitor, closely analyze about the Uyghur lives and the economic conditions of the Uyghur people in the Uyghur region. And throughout his research and throughout his visits in the Uyghur region, he realized that many problems are linked to the socio-economical root problems, which really resulted in the Uyghur people lack of jobs, have lack of access to job markets, lack of access to education, lack of access to simple infrastructure in the Uyghur region. He realized that many Uyghur children ended up in mainland China without their parents. And that was one of the very first topics that he was digging into. What are those children doing without their parents in mainland China? That's thousands of miles away from their homes. How did they end up being there? Who are they with? Who took them there? What are they doing now? What's going to happen to them? And that my father worked on this project, which is called Uyghur Homeless Children Project, where he found out that many Uyghur parents had no access to jobs in the Uyghur region. Why? Even though if they had a proper education, they do not have access because the local jobs are taken away by newly migrated Han Chinese or the descendants of the ex-PCC militants. And those Uyghur parents will have to migrate to mainland cities like Shanghai, Guangzhou, and Beijing to work in low-income factory jobs to be able to provide just bread for their families, to put bread on their tables. And those children oftentimes end up being alone or kidnapped by Chinese smugglers. And what this linked to why are jobs being taken away from the Uyghur families because of the discrimination that's been proposed in the entire system. And why is this why is there discrimination being proposed in the entire system? That links to how the media is portraying the Uyghur population. But the Chinese government is the only entity that has full control of the Chinese media. There's no free press that exists in China. So my father, it's like a whole chain issue. From one problem connecting to another problem, he realized that there's a deep root problem, which is the Chinese government has not implemented its own constitutional law as it's promised. When the Chinese government took over the Uyghur region, one thing they promised was that the Uyghur people will be granted dignity, their rights, just like the rest of China, just like the other 55 ethnic groups, 55 ethnic groups that are living in China. But that's not what really happened. The full Chinese name of the region is Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region, this term that many Uyghurs do not like. Why? First, Xinjiang means new territory in Chinese, which is a colonial term that was given by the Chinese government when they took over the land. The Uyghur Autonomous Region, reminding us that the Uyghur people were granted autonomy, but in fact, Uyghurs do not have access to true autonomy. The local governments are not ruled by Uyghur individuals. School programs are not run by the Uyghur people. Textbooks are written by Uyghurs, but only under approval by the Chinese officials. And a side fact that most of those textbook writers, the authors of those textbooks now, are also in prison for even putting out textbooks that had any Uyghur historic content in it that was approved by the Chinese government at the first place. Many intellectuals that I mentioned who could be publishers, who could be professors, are also targeted and being put in prison. Many intellectuals like my father, the elites of the Uyghur society, any influential Uyghurs who could potentially be influential have all been targeted and put in either in prison or re-education centers. And my father could not sit there and let it happen, so he had to write about it. He had to let the world know what's really happening, because he thought, if the Chinese government doesn't listen to Uyghur intellectuals like me, maybe they will listen to the world. And the Chinese government didn't like that, and that's why they put him into prison and silenced him and sentenced him to life. And that is also a message to the world that any dissatisfaction that can be revealed to the society on the Chinese government, whether your approach is peaceful or not, you can only praise.
Mr. Enver, what the world should do to put the suffering of Uyghur people to an end? What would be your advice to European or Czech Republic's politicians, government, the public, media? What should we do to put this to an end?
Very important and difficult question. Let me say something before answering your question. We Uyghurs are ancient people in Central Asia. The first people who began sedentary life in Central Asia with long history, civilization for Central Asia, from the world. But for the communist regime, with CCP, we are backward people and we are an obstacle for the implementation of the Belt and Road Initiative of China. Either the Uyghurs should be completely absorbed by China, or we should disappear. And as you said, to achieve this goal, China is terrorizing our people, criminalizing our people, putting in concentration camps, mass Chinese immigration, which is now more than 45% of the population, excluding the military and so-called Xinjiang Construction Corps. So if we put together, all together, the Chinese, Han Chinese population in my Uyghur region is more than half, more than 50%. To achieve its goal, China is doing forced assimilation, forbidding practice of religion. The education is being Sinicized, and children of those who are put in camp are in the state orphan houses, being grown up in Chinese, only in Chinese. So it is a modern genocide is going on in 21st century, which especially in Europe, we lived a genocide 80 years ago, and there's a word, never again. But the never again is happening. The free world, especially to your question, Europe, can do more. Can do more. Be serious and constant on human rights policy. Really be united on our European values. Not base our politics on money rules, but the values should rule. The European Union is a value-based union. And we Europeans, you Europeans, I say we Europeans because I'm for the 50 years in Europe.
We should prove that, right?
Thank you. We should prove that. Thank you very much for that. We should prove that. And if we sacrifice a lot for our freedom and democracy, for beginning with French Revolution more than 200 years ago, we have now rethink, re-educate the CCP, the communist ruled China, because it is going to happen to be a potential threat for our coming generations. And we begin there to re-educate China and rethink our policy towards China in general. So China was 30 years ago a third, so-called at that time, third world country. So in a way, I think due to, I would call it wrong policy, short-sighted policy, we made China the most strong policy country in the world. It is with the help of the Western democracies. And now it's time to make a turn back and step by step, based on our values, and use our strength and defend our next generations. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for sharing your thoughts with us, for reminding us that actually human rights and respect for fundamental freedoms should be at the very core of our policy and of our actions. Otherwise, we are risking our own human rights and fundamental freedoms in the future.
Exactly.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You're welcome.